There's such an aspect of stillness. It's interesting. The Even the dynamic aspects of this apparent existence are seemingly filled to the brim with stillness. Whenever you have the opportunity to visit nature, just observe, just absorb, it's filled with stillness. So it's can be palpably felt here now. It's definitely a little early in the morning to do a live. So we'll see if anybody's able to show up. It's been a while since we jumped on and did a live. Thought it would be interesting to kind of do a little bit of an update with what seems to be going on, and a whole bunch of interesting things are arising. So if anybody has any questions, or if you just want to sit. So as there seems to be a lot of collective motions. It's an interesting thing to kind of be able to observe where masses of people moving in similar directions or having very similar experiences. This really does seem to be a theme, and it kind of imparts a lot of how everything is touching and connected in that way. So it seems like a lot of people right now are experiencing a state of maybe resignation or disinterest, and maybe a quieting or a stillness of seeking, which is perfect in a lot of ways. Although, what that can also tend to kind of bring about seems is some level of complacency. It's not an either or situation. If you are starting to feel resigned or uninterested, there's some benefit in that, of course, because you're not stretching and reaching for something that isn't here. You're not seeking, you're not predicating that aspect of experience on lacking. Yet, what seems to be the identified response to that is moving from that space of, maybe you could call it motivation or an ambitious motion, to find something better, to awaken, to find peace. And then what tends to happen is, if the identity is involved, it pushes us into complacency or more disassociation, just without the seeking. Turns out it's the same mechanism. And for anyone out there who is experiencing that particular movement, it seems to be a collective movement at the moment anyway. A lot of people are experiencing that simultaneously, it seems. And that's good. I mean, truly, there's no need to chase any videos or chase any new information, because everything you've ever needed to know it's already held. The irony of watching a video and enjoying the content of that video is that it's just resonating with something that's already here. So it's not in the content of the video, it's not in the detail, it's already present. And that part can be difficult to see sometimes. So, yeah, it's not really about the quantity of videos or even the practice in general. It's not necessary. Those things can become fixations anyway. For a lot of people, they turn all of their attention into a practice, and then they won't let that go. when it's reached a potential threshold or it's become identified with. So, pointing to life as improvisation is a piece of this. All right, I already have a question. It says, what sort of questions are you up to answering on the stream? Anything. Ask anything. I mean, to be really honest, there's no knowledge. So it's all going to be intuitive. It's going to be met intuitively. And, sometimes there are themes and pointings that shows up, and those change. If any of you have watched videos that were early on to more recent videos, you'll probably notice that there's just these shifting themes that show up. It can be definitely felt here. So if a theme arises, it arises, but it's not really content. Sometimes there's an invitation that comes up, an invitation to have a talk or go, basically like a TED Talk kind of situation. And it's always kind of funny because they're always curious about the content. And it's like, there really is no content. It's in the moment, it seems. This is not like a wealth of knowledge over here. There's not a sense of certainty. That's not really how it arises. Okay, it says, I tried the exercise of feeling the body for 5 minutes every hour. First few days, it went great, but then it became increasingly harder to stay with the body senses. The mind quickly draws back attention. Yeah, so that particular threshold seems to be pretty common. One of the first people that pointing arose for mentioned that each time he was in the midst of working and the notification would go off on the phone or sound, he would stop what he was doing, which he didn't want to do. There was a resistance to that. And then he would step into sensation, and there was a resistance to that. You're just basically encountering resistance itself. It's a matter of continuing to move with this and see if you can test that potential threshold. And I know that sounds a lot like agency, and that sounds a lot like doership. Yet what we're doing here is, using that same metaphor of building the bridge across this chasm of what we know to what we don't know, or what the unknown holds for us. We use some of the tools and materials on the side of the chasm that we reside. So it might feel like a little bit of effort. The strange thing about effort is that resistance is effort. All effort is resistance. When the Buddhists point to chop wood, carry water, they're pointing to the resistance of doing these tasks. So they say, before enlightenment, what does one do? Chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, what does one do? Chop wood, carry water. They're also pointing to there is no reward. Nothing is gained. As the Heart Sutra says, there is no decrease. There is no increase. And so at first, it's this resistance to chopping wood and carrying water. I don't want to chop wood. I don't want to carry water. And then we just find ourselves in the midst of it, and there is no resistance. That's kind of the pointing. So and this is probably expected to some degree, but keep going. If you notice that there's more resistance or it's becoming more difficult, that's a sign of something. It tends to be more challenging the closer we get to something that wants to remain hidden, or there's an effort or a resistance to revealing. So keep going. He says, I feel like I'm someone that learns well from reading. Are there any notable books you've read that you'd suggest? Yeah, so the cleanest pointing I can give here in regards to this is there's absolutely nothing to learn. This is actually more of an unlearning. This is not about how much content that you can hold or the information. It's more about removing the need for that type of certainty, removing the qualifications that seem to be necessary in order to embark on this path. And if you can start to see those particular requirements in place, then you know where the resistance and the obscuration is coming in. Oftentimes, the identity uses learning, qualification, evaluation, these particular things as a delay mechanism. It's a form of hesitation to step into something that's right here, right now. This is actually extremely simple, so simple the mind does not like it. And it's really so supremely simple that it's kind of hard to grasp initially. Yet it comes down to just noticing where you can start to locate any sense of resistance, because ultimately the question is, can you just accept, can you just allow, can you just view everything exactly as it is without a need to modify, without a need to divert or change it? And if we sit with that, you can see what that's predicating on. To change an experience, to change something for a potential outcome, is to essentially modify our environment, our circumstances to suit us. But what are we really suiting? We're suiting the identity. We're seeking comfort. And underneath comfort is a tiny voice that's constantly saying, I don't want to feel anything. So this is the antithesis of comfort, the antithesis of familiarity. Yet the irony here is, whatever it is that we're avoiding or hesitating or resisting is something we actually, deep down, we do know. And that feeling feels like us. It feels like a person or an identity here. That's why we go there and we explore. So to kind of really come back to that question, if there's anything to read, just read the Heart Sutra. That's the only thing that really will impart a very succinct expression of this. Truly. I mean, it's in everything, but the Heart Sutra just really gets right to it. Why do I keep manifesting myself making mistakes in an area of life that appear to have very negative consequences? I'm not consciously aware of these mistakes as they are happening. So that particular piece would basically be what we could call a pattern, and all patterns are essentially an addiction. And this is the part that can be a little bit challenging to confront, but every identified human being is addicted. They're addicted to thought, they're addicted to the narrative, and they're addicted to the patterns. The familiarity of those patterns in some way brings about a sense of satisfaction, a cause and effect experience, a predictable outcome, so on and so forth. So it's strange, and it really does seem contradictory. But to live in these patterns, there's a part of us that is absolutely satisfied because we already know the result. The best pointing here is, in the midst of these particular areas of life that seem to have these repetitive consequences, it's not about the doing. In fact, the recommendation is, what would it be to become really, really still and not do anything? And to recognize that even finding a solution is actually contributing to the pattern itself. In fact, that is the pattern. It is essentially creating or perceiving of a problem and creating this compulsive need to do something about that. And that is what leads us into a complete place of displacement or disassociation. What does it feel like to be in the midst of that pattern? Can you hit the brakes? Can you stop and just become very, very, very still and don't do anything? Don't even allow the thoughts to control the situation, and see if you can notice certain sensations in the body, because that's what it's predicating on. There's a fundamental sense of lacking that tends to live behind the navel, not always, yet it just tends to be there for most people. And that particular sensation is actually has a lot of narrative and predicating a lot of compulsive behaviors, it seems. So in that particular area of life, don't solve the problem. Also, don't contribute to the problem. Just see what is arising, that the actions that are being taken are hiding, because that's essentially what it's doing. It's keeping us in a state of distraction. And as mentioned before, the way we can just view any kind of addiction is that It's a state of avoidance, avoiding something, and it's sensation. Everything everyone is doing that's identified is either pursuing a better sensation, or they are attempting to strategize or ensure their lives in a way that they can avoid certain negative sensations. It's all about feeling something. It's all about feeling happy or feeling sad or frustrated or these particular sensations. Those are what's basically creating this sense of compensation. So it's really about paying attention. Notice if you can see or feel where that seems to be emanating from, because when you kind of get a taste of that, when it becomes a lot more apparent, and you do know it, it's been there pretty much your entire existence. It's been there since the moment you can remember. See if you can perceive that sensation and the intensity as it arises. Does it make you perceive life as a desperate experience? Do you desperately need to do something about it? Because it's really always saying anything other than this. It's insisting anything other than this. That question comes up a lot for people, even in sessions here, these one-on-ones. Why does this always happen to me? Nothing's happening to us, but there is something here that's creating a narrative that's imparting a sense of, well, there's someone here and these experiences are personal, that's happening to me. Life is just happening. That's just the nature of existence. Just happens. Just spontaneous creation in the midst of this vast emptiness, and then emptiness and form and emptiness, so on. Yet that kind of pointing might be a little too direct for some people here. And so, just as a reminder, meeting one on one, you will be met exactly where you are. And sometimes the conversations won't be that type of depth, yet we will still be peeling layers as we go. So if you don't perceive of emptiness and that seems like some kind of mystical experience, no need to chase that either. Just address what's arising all the time, here now, all the time. There's never a moment that this space here isn't filled with sensation of some sort. It's like a lava lamp, and what we tend to do, identify or identity wise, is that we objectify the experience. We make it an object instead of an ongoing experience. And perhaps you might be able to look back at being a small child and being in the midst of play and losing your sense of time, losing your sense of object. You're just in the midst of something, and you're just swept into that flow state is actually presence. That's it. So just a reminder that these particular patterns, what we really want to start doing in just engaging in a curious and courageous way, is interrupting all patterns. If you know there's a specific pattern, don't buy the hype and say that you're trapped in that pattern. Play with anything outside of that pattern just to see if you can start to break it apart. But it is predicating itself off a fundamental sense of lacking. Uh, okay, let's see. It says, "Hey Josh, I feel a little bit stuck in this place of the observer, as if watching thoughts in the body that still has issues, but I also know that it's all made of awareness and that there's only awareness." Yeah, this this transition from the intellectual into the experiential is really the name of the game. So, to use a metaphor that's come up recently, this is so fundamental, it would be the equivalent of asking you if you could describe the color red, so, because I've never seen it. So could you put it in words so that I know what red is? And as you consider that and sit with that, you'll find that that's not possible. That's where we're headed here. So the observer experience, we could say, is that fundamental subject object experience, but there's still a sense of resistance there. And resistance can be a very subtle experience as well. It doesn't always have to have a sense of intensity. And that resistance is essentially saying, I acknowledge this experience. So consider this just briefly, and I know this is still intellectual, doing our best to make these pointings more applicable, yet There is a vast difference between acknowledgement and acceptance. Acknowledgement is to hold something at a distance and basically say, I acknowledge that over there. There's that over there, over there, over there. And acceptance is an embracing of experience. So from here, it's a matter of experimentation. It's a matter of how much deeper, closer can you allow yourself to be from something that's actually a primary sensation. You'll notice it's still something that doesn't want to be looked at, something that doesn't want to be touched. The nature of shadow is that which isn't being illuminated, the places we don't want to look initially, and then the places we didn't know were in the shadow. Those just get revealed on their own. And so there's still something there that's likely being bypassed. When people feel like they're stuck in the observer, there's still a sensation or an experience or something that they just don't want to touch. They just want to skip into, and it can be very subtle. So it's not, this isn't about accountability necessarily. It's just, can you pay closer attention to what's immediate? And you might start to notice that there's the sense of, I know what emptiness is, or I know that this is all awareness, or I know that this is all just this, or however that shows up. This is the great I am. And in doing that, there's a subtle bypassing of something that's here that feels maybe challenging or difficult. So having a sense that there's no one here intellectually is an entirely different experience than to essentially meet the experience so completely that there is no experience. We could just call that a no self. But no self is not an experience. There's no one there to experience it. There is no experience itself. This is the nature of when the Buddhists point to life is suffering. It's not a comparison. It's not a contrast to something that isn't suffering. They're basically saying that's the last place we tend to look, is what seems to hurt, or what seems difficult, or what's uncomfortable, or what's scary if a fear barrier is arising. That particular experience itself is saying, or pointing rather, is saying, merge with suffering, become it, you are it. So going back to that, in the place of the observer, observe thoughts less, observe sensation more, because thoughts are still attempting to displace that sensational experience. And whatever sensation seems to arise, become it instantaneously. And you may find that there's an acceleration that seems to happen, a sudden shift. And it can become so quick that even if there is a mind attempting to create a sense of observation there, it cannot keep up. And so it just ceases. Hopefully that helps. If you want to get into this more deeply, of course, you can always schedule a one-on-one session. The schedule did open up a little bit more recently, so you can check it out on the website. Let's see. Let's see. Are you saying that I'm addicted to a feeling that comes up when my mistakes are called out? No. So feelings themselves cannot be identified with or addicted. The sensation, the emotion, the evaluation, the narrative can be an addictive experience. And so finding and playing with the boundary there. And what it kind of looks like is throughout life, we experience an emotion. Let's say it's sadness, and we notice it and we bounce off what seems to be a precipice of sadness. And that sends us into thought, and it sends us into compulsive action to solve a problem. That's what it tends to be. The pointing here is saying, go to what appears to be that threshold of what sadness is and penetrate into the granular experience, the individual aspects, the minutia, the color, the texture. Get into the sensation itself away from the meaning and the thoughts that are evaluating. That's what the pointing is. So it's not necessarily a feeling that's the addiction. The addiction itself isn't necessarily what we're pursuing. In fact, the addiction itself is about avoidance. That's all it is. It's about moving away from something and disassociating from something. That's what all addiction is. I'm going to feel good over here, but it's actually predicating itself off of something that we don't like. In other words, why does somebody want to drink? Because they're not feeling good now. They don't like the sensations they're feeling now. They want to cover that up. So it's not really in a pursuit of anything, even though it can appear that way. The addictions themselves are actually attempting to run from something else, and that is what's primary. So if you can start to notice what's compensating, what is protesting too much, so to speak, you will always notice a type of sensation that feels uncomfortable, something you don't like, something that there might be a sense of certainty around. This sensation means or is evidence of how lacking I am, how worthless of a human being I am. It tends to be shame in that variety. And then the pattern itself, there can be something satisfying about watching the pattern play itself out. And we don't always notice that. Another way to put this, which it's a little less compassionate, but we wouldn't have something in our existence or our lives unless we wanted it there to some degree. And it's not really you that wants it there. It's just the identity, because it uses this pattern as a space of orientation. And ultimately, you'll start to find that this shame or whatever this sensation that's being held or hidden or covered is, the experience of it is pain. And we find that the identity is basically protecting pain because it uses that as its primary space of orientation. In other words, the identity is constantly saying, I know I'm real because I feel pain. And so it holds this little ember of pain through experience and through thought and through narrative and protects it at all costs. And that's when we start to find defensiveness and triggers. When we start getting close to that pain, we'll begin to find that the pain itself is innocence. In other words, it's uncaused. It's not pain at all. That's just the obscuration. That's like wearing those Vision Pros, and it's the overlay of the experience. So to touch it directly is to know what it is. It's just a primary sense of resistance to a sensation that has no meaning. And that strangely becomes an orientation point, a place to know something. And certainty begins to kind of span out from there, it seems. Okay, it says, while on mushrooms, it or me was like a screen of light flickering on and off, and it doesn't feel like I could control my avatar body in it. Does it feel like that for you? Got lots of doubt. There is nothing to control. There's no one here to control anything. If something is arising, it just is. We find ourselves in the midst of that. This is actually happening for every human being. Every human being is either run by reaction or intuition. And then afterward, thought comes in and attempts to justify that experience and impart a personality or a doer to it. But it always happens in reflection. If we're actually completely present in the midst, we find that there's no one doing anything. So what it's like here is, here's an example. A few weeks ago, there was about 40 inches of snow that fell here. And after doing sessions, just found the body moving snow outside. And there wasn't a plan. There wasn't a forethought. It was just being in the midst of that. That's what was happening. That's it. Being with that the whole way, there was no one doing it. It's very much like that. And yeah, there's a lot of experience itself, or reality, does seem quite a bit like a frame rate of flickering particles and waves. In fact, anyone who's listening now, just let's do this little practice real quick and see if you can perceive this. Just see if you can defocus your eyes a little bit. And here, keep your eyes open. Primarily, though, bring attention to the sound of the voice and just kind of look off in the distance a tad. Do your best not to keep attention on any particular focus, but allow attention to kind of move into this area and also into the very periphery. And just take a few deep breaths and relax and see if you can notice that there is a snow, almost like right here, right now. Can you see all those particles? They're very small. And they're everywhere. These little, almost like these little dots of color. Or sometimes it can be monochromatic. It doesn't actually matter, but there's a significant amount of motion happening right here, everywhere. And it's such an intense amount of motion that the overlays gives us a sense of ignoring that. Do you perceive it? Can you see those little particles, almost like the static snow on an old CRT television? All right, let's go into, let's see, Raj says, I find that the mind always has a need to create a story about any actions or experience I take part. It's annoying, and I'd like to live in a mirror-like state where I let go of making up stories. It's definitely not you making up stories. It's the essence of what the mind does. This is not about battling thoughts. That's exactly what it wants us to do. It predicates its entire um, perception, or all the echoes, if you will, the house of mirrors, as you've probably heard, on a sense of resistance. And so, even if we start to resist thought, we're falling for the bait. Ultimately, we allow it to do whatever it's doing, and we bring attention to that which is absolutely spontaneously present. And that's right here. You can feel it, it's felt, it's sensed. And this can be useful to explore the sense gates, the visual field, sound, so on and so forth. Yet, it seems like there is a very common pattern with identity that is referring to sensations in this particular region. And it's because they feel so personal to us. They have a lot of meaning, these emotional experiences. To go beyond that, we find that the sensations seem to be spontaneously created from nothing, from emptiness itself. And to kind of clarify emptiness, it's not like when you look in a box or something like that and you don't see anything inside. It's an essence, it's a infinite potential. There's an energy even in emptiness. Yet it just doesn't seem to have any apparent form. There's no aberration. And so the primary experience to get into that sensation, as we get closer and we look for the center, something begins to become really apparent, that underneath this apparent form, this expression that just wants to be maximally expressed, and I'm not attempting to really anthropomorphize it here, yet its entire existence is expression. That's it. Just for the sake of expression. It's not that it really has a want, but that's just a way to put it. It's just an expression, just an appearance. To go to the center of that, we begin to find this sense of nothing there. We have an experience of absolute reality. We have a non-experience. We move into absolute emptiness, no self, no suffering, no experience. And that seems to be absolutely crucial along this path. And it may be because we have this perception of two worlds. We have this relative objective reality, and we have this absolute reality. And it seems to fit on this spectrum when it comes to the object of thought. There's an extreme on either side, but there's like an endpoint: extreme mind identification, extreme absolute reality. And that also imparts a boundary between the two. And for some reason that doesn't seem extremely apparent, when we step fully into absolute reality, we find there is no spectrum, that it's a continuum, and there's an absolute integration happening between what seems to be relative and what seems to be absolute. We could even say that this is a little secret in the Siddhartha metaphor, moving from extreme wealth to extreme asceticism and poverty in that lifetime. And along the way, those particular extremes draw themselves naturally, integrating into the middle at the base of this Bodhi tree, where final integration occurs, where Mara comes, temptation, desire, temptation, desire, and the Buddha burns and does not lean toward a better sensation or away, just burns, just with it exactly as it is, and thus breaks into nirvana. For most of us along this journey, it's the stepping into that absolute. And what we find is that the sensations are the best guide we have. They are always present. They're always instantaneous. They have no apparent end, no apparent beginning. It's an ongoing experience. Yet in that, we start to see that there's this spawning of spontaneous creation, like the Big Bang itself. This emptiness and the spontaneous creation, boom, just like that. To have that visceral experience firsthand begins to essentially integrate and usher other particular facets of this in naturally, where there is absolutely no effort or resistance along the way. Until then, we move to where we find resistance, because the resistance is the obscuration. The resistance is essentially saying this shouldn't be this way, it should be another way, so on and so forth. And that is an absolute illusion, because there is no alternative for this. Whatever it is, that's it. And it's not a matter of debating what's true about it. It's whatever's perceived of it is it. Then is there a secondary reactive experience of resistance there? That's what we start to entertain. And it's basically, as resistance goes, the primary reaction, the primary layer that identity must depend on in order to give us a sense of us, a me and I. But really, from here, it's really clear. Identity is just a series of reactions, and it starts when we're children, and we have these intense experiences, and we find a sense of comfort, and all comfort is a break from the feeling, and we develop a pattern around comfort, and we continue repeating that particular pattern, and that branches out. And as the anthropologists say, there's basically 9 personality types, and it makes sense because there's only that many combinations of coping and avoidance mechanisms out there, and that thus you have a pattern that we could just call a personality and an identity. That's just how it seems to go. So it's all about reaction here. We don't let go of making up stories. It lets itself go. We just remain present with what is, not entertaining any future outcome or some farcical past obscuration, and we just remain with what is. And this all works itself out perfectly. These obscurations move into emptiness naturally on their own. Every expression moves into emptiness. If we were to impart a reason, it's so that it can return to emptiness. And why does emptiness create form? So it can return to emptiness. I mean, it's that fundamental, it seems. And that doesn't necessarily impart a beginning or an end either. Never started, never ends. Let's see. Is there a universal emotion that underlies all emotion before the labeling of sadness, anger, etc.? It seems that way. Instead of calling it a universal emotion, we can just call it a primary sensation of resistance, a primary sense of lacking, or we could say a fundamental sense of separation. Essentially, every sensational experience, no matter what it is, no matter what it seems to be, there's no hierarchy. In other words, it's all breadcrumbs. It's all essentially the same. All form is the same. All form is emptiness. It's all the same. So whatever it is, if we are comparing it to something else, that's that subject-object relationship. And you'll start to see the identity is a random object generator. It loves to just continue breaking reality into objects. And that keeps us really busy. It keeps us away from something, all in the name of displacement, it's a strange mechanism. Yet it makes sense if you're looking at it as a survival mechanism, because the identity doesn't know how to orient here at all. It's not designed for that. And so what it does is it does everything it can to keep attention and experience away from that. But the best way to describe this experience, we could just say we are the infinite attention of consciousness. That's essentially what awareness is. And if attention ever feels bottled up and displaced from something else, then that's not actually attention. Attention is infinite. So what we do is we start to move into a place that we're actually aware that has constantly been displaced. So it's not necessarily a universal emotion, and It's absolutely so fundamental that it would be like attempting to describe the color red to someone else, yet you already know it. The majority of human beings will say that it's a feeling behind the navel. They just feel this constant buzzing. We can call it a long term stress response, even. That every sensation is it's all the same. But we could say that the initial experience is like following breadcrumbs. So let's say you feel a sensation here and you get into that, and maybe the mind is labeling, okay, this is anxiety. Okay, so you hit that threshold, the perceived place of anxiety, and then you go further into the granular aspects of that experience. This part is challenging to speak about, yet you want to become all experience, no matter how it's changing or shifting. You want to become experience itself, and you will find it's like a lava lamp. It actually there's no boundaries between what seems to be this sensation or this sensation. It's actually just more. It's like this flowing, morphing current is really what it's like. And if we're so with that, there is nothing else. It is just that there's no one even having an experience any longer. It's just fundamentally this, no experience. And we have this merging, this unification. That's what it is, to be with everything exactly as it is, no other option. A fundamental collapsing happens, a reunification, a merging. And this is essentially the experience of emptiness. When you have a subject and an object, and the subject is merging with the object, that is no more subject, no more object. There is no one there to experience. There is no experience. It's just this. And spontaneously, it seems to do this: immediately break apart into creation, destruction, we could say. Boom, 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 boom. And that seems to be happening trillions, billions of trillions of times per second. Just, it's like this blinking in and out. In fact, it's so clear that it's a blinking in and out that it's actually not one to the other. It's simultaneous. It is an inherent paradox. All merging, collapsing, all creation. We already know the creation part when it comes to the objects of the mind. Now it's the unification. That's what the path is all about. No object. Is being aware of what or where awareness is, noticing, being aware of thoughts, being aware of the feel of the ground when walking, noticing what is actually an awareness seems like presence, a gate. So, okay, being aware of all those particular things and bringing attention to them is actually a wonderful, it's an anti-practice. It's already happening. So it's not like something we're adding. We're just now letting attention go to where it's gathering is really crucial. I do want to just illustrate real quickly a potential obstacle here. Some people will have a subconscious awareness of something that seems to be in this body that they don't like the feeling of. And so they want to bypass that and move from this headspace into this I am, this like this attention of awareness. And that can happen. And it's a nice little dose of reality. Yet when we feel like we lose it or it's just a glimpse, it's because something is being bypassed. Any place there's a sense of no, any place there's a sense of pushing away or resistance will continue to hold us in an experience of losing something, an oscillation, so to speak. So just be aware of that. Yeah, bring attention there a lot. And don't forget, attention goes wherever there is something that's arising. So in the midst, let's say, of you're in public and somebody says something rude to you, or they do something, is there an instant noticing of a contraction or something that's arising right here in the body? If there is, that's where attention is. That's where we must go, and just see if there's a subtle retraction from that experience, because that's what it tends to be. Some kind of don't want to feel that. But I think that's a really good question. Yes, because it is useful while walking to feel feel every aspect of the foot touching the ground, and to notice. There's somebody recently working with who had a pretty vivid Kensho initial awakening. He was speaking to, while he was walking outside, he noticed that the air had a flavor. He could taste the air for the first time. He noticed it, and it's just where attention was going instead of that resistance. And what you'll start to realize is mind identification, staying up here in this conceptual space, has to come with resistance. It has to resist where attention is flowing all the time. And it can seem very random and spontaneous and mysterious, but attention is just moving, spontaneous noticing. And that's happening all the time. But to stay up here in this conceptual space, we have to start rejecting those things over and over and over and over. And then it becomes unbeknownst, it seems, for a lot of us. So yes, bringing that kind of attention to all experience is absolutely a worthwhile engagement. No question about it. Just please do not forget that this doesn't get bypassed. That's all. It doesn't have to only be here, but we always notice here as well. Attention isn't only in the conceptual. That's the shock here. But perception gives us the impression that we can get locked in the mind and locked into thought. It's actually not the case. And so when we talk about a realization, there's a noticing of, wait, there's an awareness and an attention always here, always here, always here. Always. It's like this multifocal expanse, this smearing, this width of attention and with thought. But in the meantime, what we do is we do all that we can to displace our connection with thought, because that is an addictive experience. And every time we take a dose of that, we run the risk of ending up in that cycle all over again. So we continue displacing. That doesn't mean we reject thought. We utilize thought. As soon as you notice thought, bounce off that thought. Don't entertain. Don't add another thought, and move right into sensation. And the reason sensation is such a powerful force here is because it's always here. Even if you were in a cave where there was no apparent other type of stimulation, there's always sensation here. Always sensation here. So you go all the way home every time. So we're not fighting thought. We're just not jumping on the thought train. That's it. We're not entertaining it. We're not giving it fuel. That's all. That's a good question, though. Hi, Josh. I noticed my mind co-opting a lot of what I perceive as insights. For example, the illusion of a doer. It can be quite frustrating and confusing. Any suggestions or tips? Yeah, so that's a good question. The mind is by nature going to co-opt essentially everything. But it's just a matter of, once those things are being co-opted, not to fall for the bait and not to start entertaining that. Notice that something's occurring and then just keep coming home. It's really just a refusal to leave attention here. Because I think what you'll start to notice is, to spend time in the conceptual space is an absolute rejection of feeling anything here. So what we're doing is we're kind of going the other direction a little bit. And in that, we start to condition the mind. Notice the reaction, though. Let's see, once you notice frustration or confusion, there's a sensation that accompanies that experience. So that means frustration is what's arising. It's not arising in spite of anything. So frustration doesn't exist alone or at contrast to anything. If frustration is arising, you move directly into that experience as completely and fully as possible. There is nothing else. Just like that. Let everything be that immediate. And I think what it is there's this subtle sense of, well, frustration isn't a feeling that I want. It is everything. Whatever is arising is everything. It's not a part of everything. It is everything. It's literally all of this. So be aware of that too. I mean, if you catch yourself right there and you notice the co-opting and then you notice frustration, there you go. That's what's arising. Don't engage with those thoughts that are narrating around frustration. Feel that sensation. And maybe you start to realize that you can't find frustration there. It's just maybe a buzzing, a whirling. Maybe it doesn't seem to have much quality at all. Maybe it immediately and spontaneously transcends into something else. It says, from your perspective, does it make sense to make plans for the future for the day? Seems like a functional illusion. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with plans, because in the aspect of making plans, it's a little bit of a fine line, but to make plans is to essentially engage with something now. And the mind can say, and we can justify, for a later moment, but as soon as the plan is made, there is no plan. We don't have to project into a future moment. So there's nothing wrong with planning. Even planning can happen in the present. It's just not a planning for the sake of a future moment. It's just something that's arising. something that's even functional. And yeah, ultimately it's an illusion, yet it seems to be an aspect of this. Thich Nhat Hanh points pretty clearly. He says, if he could add something to the Heart Sutra, he would say, there is no being, nothing here, no one. There is no non-being, still seems to be a nose. This relative objective experience is not in spite of that which is absolute. And this can be tricky for some people because a lot of traditions will point only to the absolute. And it makes sense why they do so, because to have that dose, we start to see that there's this. The paradox is complete, it's integrated. Yet what that can give us the impression of is all of this is an illusion, so we reject it. That will get us right where we started. Reject nothing. If it's arising, there's nothing to reject. It's here. The whole point of all this suffering is about rejection itself. Reject nothing. If it seems to be true, allow it to be true and continue engaging. It's just really that fundamentally simple. If it's raining outside and we're thinking about a sunny day, that's called suffering. But the sunny day does not exist. It's only the rain. So to be with everything completely as it is, just as it is, with no modification, no change, no wishing, no fantasy, we will begin to see that there's nothing that's rejected at all. So no problem with planning. Just pay attention to what it's referencing. Is it referencing a feeling of lacking? Is it referencing like, I don't like this moment, so I'm making a plan for something better? And you'll see that a lot with vacations for people. Life here sucks now. I can't wait for this other experience that's going to be better. And we all know how that goes. You go into that experience and then you end up coming back home and you go right back into this state of suffering. Some people can't even enjoy their vacation because they're so worried about all the things that are happening at home that aren't here, that they're essentially still suffering, and then they come back home into that what appears to be a mess. This isn't a departure from something. Please just settle into this as much as you possibly can. There is nothing wrong, nothing at all. Nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with any experience. And also just pay attention to anytime we point to something out here like something is wrong, we're really pointing inwardly. It's projection. And it's pointing to a sense of shame or fundamental sense of lacking. But that can only exist if there's an object of reference, if there is something else. But there is nothing else. There is no alternative. There's no alternative for this moment. There's no alternative for this experience in this moment. It just is this. Yes, it's an ongoing, seemingly changing experience, but the only way we can perceive of the current is if we are dug into the river bottom with our feet and it's pushing against us. Otherwise, we're floating along with the current, and that can give us the very visceral sense of stillness. This is pointing right back to stillness. All things in this universe, exactly as they should be, regardless of what seems to be showing up in the political landscape, in the social, civil landscape, all of these particular pieces are the way they are. That's it. Come to terms with what is here now. And it's not hard to do so. You just be with it. And what you begin to see is all these obscurations and these overcompensations. Every war we have, all murder, all these aspects of outer suffering are oriented around an identity that is pursuing a sensation that feels better, that gets them to avoid something that they're feeling now. So really, if we want to know how to step into an existence on this planet that would improve the environment drastically and improve all of our social interactions, it's just everyone take the responsibility of their own experience. And that means waking up, accepting things exactly as they are without attempting to constantly change something to suit us, this identity, this ego that doesn't even exist. It's a clamoring for no reason. It's like watching somebody in a nightmare punching the air. You wake them up and they're still punching the air, and they look around and they go, oh yeah, no monsters. That's the identity. There's nothing to fight. It seems that way, but there isn't. Emotional work is real right now. Facing towards all fears and shadows constantly is opening me. If you notice resistance, become it as immediately as possible. Move right into it. Don't ask about detail. Don't ask where it came from. It does not matter. Those are irrelevant. That's the experience that's arising, and resistance is the obscuration. Resistance is the experience of this isn't good enough, should be some other way. That's it. Does that explain why then attention gets trapped in thought? The awareness of body sensations is significantly dulled, or focusing on sound visual field gets dull. So the survival mechanism, the protection mechanism, is designed to give us a perception of contained attention. And what that tends to do is that tends to prevent, in a state of emergency, we could just say on a biological level, it tends to prevent a nervous system overload, which would lead to like a freeze essentially. So if you're getting attacked by a bear or something and you have a nervous system overload, you're probably going to get eaten. And so when we move into a conceptual space, that disassociation from the sensations likely gets us away from that experience. And then once we've reached a place of safety and the danger has passed, we're designed to kind of re-emerge, to come all the way home. And it seems like what happens in childhood, and no one escapes childhood unscathed. No one escapes childhood without trauma. It's all relative. And so that particular trauma becomes almost a fixation and addiction to the conceptual. We find a sense of relief when we enter into a thought, fantasy, dopamine space. And that sense of relief is essentially a dulling or a non-feeling of what's going on in the body. And that becomes an addictive pattern. We just keep going there and we keep going there. And then, as mentioned before, that pattern begins to kind of branch out into these other mechanisms that are essentially doing the same. And that's personality or identity. That's what makes the coping mechanisms seem complex. But it's just been doing this for, a decent amount of what appears to be time. So attention seems to get trapped in thought, but it's whatever that mechanism is, has a talent for giving us a perceived container of experience. And what we're doing now is recognizing that there is no apparent danger right here. And obviously this can be challenging for people that might be going through something that feels really visceral for them, yet right here, right now, even in the midst of this ongoing difficulty that you may be experiencing, right here, right now, there is no impending death. You're not going to die within the next minute, 2 minutes, so on. So to start to engage with the body there, little by little, as deeply and as thoroughly as possible, we begin to essentially uncondition this mechanism. And that ultimately will lead to integration. Thanks when talking, say with Angelo, a baker, about a cake. Sentences and paragraphs exist in time. Where is awareness, concentration, thought? Let's see. That is, how do we listen or acquire into now? The trick with inquiry is it begins to get us familiar with curiosity, and it begins to sometimes get us familiar with mechanisms of thought, particular patterns that arise. But it will reach a threshold. Ultimately, just so everyone knows, inquiry will just be thought. We are ultimately heading to a place that thought does not tread. So just be aware of that. I'm not encouraging you to throw out inquiry. It's a very powerful, useful tool. Yet there can be a point where that becomes its own fixation. So just stay aware. That's all. When it comes to, let's see, sentences and paragraphs exist in time. Where's awareness, concentration, thought? How do we inquire or listen or inquire into now? To listen into now, there is something that you can absolutely sense that has nothing to do with thought at all. Sometimes that shows up visually, auditorily. Yet most of the time, the deepest aspect of this is something in this part of the body. But there's a variety of things that we can just start to listen to intuition and it'll spontaneously arise. For instance, we can ask something along the lines, if you want to inquire, is what is the sensation on the very periphery of the body? And sit and listen with that and see if you can bring attention and become aware of a sense or a sensation on just the very periphery of what feels like the body. And if you become aware of that, right now, there's a clear buzzing sensation, maybe a vibrational frequency. It could have something like a tone of heat or it can even spontaneously seem to take on color. The senses really do get overlapped here because they aren't separate either. And once you become aware of that particular sensation, you can start to naturally, without bringing any thought into it, explore the boundaries, see if you can find the furthest boundary of that sensation, see if you can find a core, see if you can find a place where it's emanating, see if you can find a place where it seems to be going, and just continue playing in that way. And quickly, all boundaries begin to essentially dissolve, and there's no body, there's no sensation. We're clearly in a state of presence without a deep sense of orientation. That's one way you can play with that. Does relaxation play a role with being attentive to the feelings? I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, yet relaxation does seem to have a quality in this, but not relaxation alone, not like an object. It just seems to be I think the best word for this, and I know words are just words, is still stillness or listening, silence. It's a slowing down. And what you'll notice is that the objects of thought, using the same metaphor I may have used in a video, if I take a piece of paper, the thickness of that piece of paper it's very thin, yes? But if I were capable of folding that piece of paper 62 times in half, on that 60-second fold, the thickness of that piece of paper would span from the surface of the earth to the surface of the moon. That's how quickly these thoughts can start to permutate. So the experience may have a tinge of relaxation because it's not an engagement with thought. And we can basically look at all thought as a reaction, a resistance. Pay attention, notice it. What does it feel like? When I say to engage with the resistance, it's not the thought itself. That's just another resistance. That's resisting the resistance. And then we can resist that resistance, and we resist that resistance. And that actually serves a pretty powerful purpose to pull us away from something that's being felt now. Go closer to that which is feeling uncomfortable. What can you say about relentless self-hatred? Yeah, self-hatred cannot exist without the thoughts. Pay attention to the thoughts and do not engage with the thoughts and move into the sensation. And even when you're in sensation, they're going to insist that that sensation means something. But that self-hatred is just a sensation that's being co-opted by thought. That's it. And it's probably uncomfortable. Let's see. Floaty and woozy sensations since the sense of falling has been realized, the constant conveyor belt of the realization of being of nature instead of in it. Tears, laughter. Thanks, Josh. Yeah, it's often like being on the edge of tears and laughter. What's the difference? What's the difference? Really? It's all just this. All right. Well, I have a session coming up pretty shortly, so I just want to say thank you to everyone. Great questions today. I appreciate everyone for participating. And yeah, just a quick reminder too. So the nonprofit has been officially formed with the state of Colorado. We'll be able to start giving out scholarships and things like that. There's a few other steps apparently that have to be done. But we are taking donations. And just as a reminder, all memberships and all of the advertisement money that comes into the channel is given to that nonprofit organization. And it's basically designed to help people who might not have the financial needs or the financial means to be able to do one-on-ones and the financial means to be able to attend retreats and things like that. It's to basically spread the resources a little bit wider so that people aren't so isolated in this. And that can help quite a bit. And as a reminder, Emerson, he's directly involved. We'll be hosting a non-duality symposium coming up. That it's also on the opencircle.org, that website. And so a few projects coming into play, and there's also some other interesting pieces coming out of that. So just a little update. But I appreciate everyone for being here. So grateful for all of you and all these questions, and resting here today, right now with me. Appreciate it. Okay, bye.